June 11th, 2010 should have been just another ordinary summer night in Crescent Bay, California. 16-year-old Clara Whitmore was dressed in a simple blue sundress, ready to celebrate her best friend Marissa Lane's birthday. Her parents, Gregory and Helen, kissed her goodbye, reminding her not to be late. She laughed, rolled her eyes in that way teenagers do, and promised, "I'll be home before 10." That promise would become a haunting echo. Clara wasn't the type of girl people expected to vanish. She was grounded, loved music, sang in the school choir, and dreamed of one day becoming a teacher. Friends said she had a way of making everyone feel included. Teachers admired her work ethic. She wasn't a rule breaker, nor someone drawn to risk. But every story has its shadows. And for Clara, that shadow came in the form of her boyfriend, Tyler Moreno. At Marissa's birthday party, Clara and Tyler had an argument. Witnesses remembered seeing Clara in tears, trying to shake off his attempts to follow her. Tyler eventually stormed out, slamming the gate behind him. 10 minutes later, Clara left too. That was the last confirmed time she was seen alive. She didn't make it home. When Clara failed to return by midnight, her parents began calling her phone. No answer. They assumed maybe she stayed longer with Marissa, but when they called Marissa's house, her friend insisted Clara had left hours earlier. By 3 a.m., panic had set in. Helen called the police, her voice trembling. Officers advised waiting until morning. She's probably out with friends, maybe cooling off after a fight. But morning brought no Clara. Her bed remained untouched, her toothbrush unused, her phone still going straight to voicemail. And suddenly, a tight-knit town that never locked its doors was forced to ask, where is Clara Whitmore? Her disappearance spread fast. Volunteers combed the beaches and wooded trails, flyers with her smiling face covered telephone poles, helicopters hovered over cliffs, yet there was nothing. No backpack, no footprints, no signs of a struggle. And so began the case that would grip Crescent Bay for nearly a decade. If your daughter walked out after a party and never came back, where would your mind go first? Do you think Clara ran away, or was someone waiting for her in the dark? Every missing person case starts with the last person seen with them. For Clara, that was Tyler Moreno. Tyler was 17, athletic, and well-known around school. To outsiders, he seemed like a typical teenage boyfriend. But behind closed doors, Clara's friends whispered that their relationship was rocky. Constant breakups, jealous fights, dramatic reconciliations. The night of Marissa's party, witnesses recalled hearing Clara tell Tyler, "I'm done. This is the last time." He had stormed off, and just minutes later, Clara followed. Police quickly zeroed in on him. His story didn't help. At first, Tyler claimed he went home after leaving the party, but under pressure he changed his statement, now saying he had walked to the beach to clear his head. Investigators questioned him for hours. His parents hired a lawyer, but the damage was done. The community already saw him as guilty. Neighbors whispered about seeing a dark sedan idling near the party street. Others swore they saw Clara walking toward the park. But the loudest theory remained the simplest. Tyler had snapped after the fight and done something to Clara. Even Clara's mother, Helen, publicly pointed to Tyler. At a vigil weeks later, she spoke through tears. "He knows more than he's saying. My daughter would never just leave us."
June 11, 2010 should have been just another ordinary summer night in Crescent Bay, California. 16-year-old Clara Whitmore was dressed in a simple blue sundress, ready to celebrate her best friend Marissa Lane's birthday. Her parents, Gregory and Helen, kissed her goodbye, reminding her not to be late. She laughed, rolled her eyes in that way teenagers do, and promised, "I'll be home before 10." That promise would become a haunting echo. Clara wasn't the type of girl people expected to vanish. She was grounded, loved music, sang in the school choir, and dreamed of one day becoming a teacher. Friends said she had a way of making everyone feel included. Teachers admired her work ethic. She wasn't a rule breaker, nor someone drawn to risk. But every story has its shadows, and for Clara, that shadow came in the form of her boyfriend, Tyler Moreno. At Marissa's party, Clara and Tyler had an argument. Witnesses remembered seeing Clara in tears, trying to shake off his attempts to follow her. Tyler eventually stormed out, slamming the gate behind him. 10 minutes later, Clara left too. That was the last confirmed time she was seen alive. She didn't make it home. When Clara failed to return by midnight, her parents began calling her phone. No answer. They assumed maybe she stayed longer with Marissa, but when they called Marissa's house, her friend insisted Clara had left hours earlier. By 3 a.m., panic had set in. Helen called the police, her voice trembling. Officers advised waiting until morning. She's probably out with friends, maybe cooling off after a fight. But morning brought no Clara. Her bed remained untouched, her toothbrush unused, her phone still going straight to voicemail. And suddenly, a tight-knit town that never locked its doors was forced to ask, "Where is Clara Whitmore?" Her disappearance spread fast. Volunteers combed the beaches and wooded trails. Flyers with her smiling face covered telephone poles. Helicopters hovered over cliffs. Yet there was nothing. No backpack, no footprints, no signs of a struggle. And so began the case that would grip Crescent Bay for nearly a decade. If your daughter walked out after a party and never came back, where would your mind go first? Do you think Clara ran away, or was someone waiting for her in the dark?
Skeptics pointed out that the camera quality was poor. What if it wasn't Clara at all? What if the town was chasing shadows, comforting themselves with the illusion of hope? Others argued that if it was Clara, she looked distressed. One officer noted her head turning back sharply as if someone had called out to her, or worse, followed her. The footage left more questions than answers. Detectives examined the area where she was seen. The marina at night was a world of its own. Creaking docks, the sour smell of fish, the sound of boats rocking gently on black water. It wasn't a place teenagers normally wandered, especially not alone. Search dogs were brought in, scouring every inch of the boardwalk and nearby warehouses, but no trace of Clara was found. No dropped belongings. No witnesses who claimed to see her in person. Tyler Moreno, once the center of suspicion, suddenly found himself in a strange limbo. Some still believed he had hurt Clara, maybe even forced her toward the marina. Others argued the video was proof of her independence, that she'd chosen to leave him and Crescent Bay behind. Tyler himself pleaded with investigators, saying he had no idea what Clara was doing there, but the community had already made up its mind. Half branded him guilty, the other half saw him as a scapegoat. The Whitmores faced a cruel dilemma. For every person who assured them the footage meant Clara was alive, another insisted it was nothing but false hope. Her father admitted to friends he wasn't sure anymore. If she was alive, he said quietly, why didn't she come home? The uncertainty gnawed at everyone. What drove Clara to the marina that night? Was she running away from Tyler, from her parents, from herself? Or was she running to someone? A secret friend? A hidden relationship? A dangerous stranger? Years later, townspeople would still argue about that tape, replaying it like a cursed relic of the case. Some claimed they saw fear in her body language. Others saw determination, as though she had chosen her path. And here's where I want to pull you, the audience, into the story. If you were Clara's parent, would you see that video as hope or as horror? Does a blurry image of your child in the middle of the night reassure you or break you even more? This footage was the first great fracture in the case, tearing Crescent Bay into opposing camps. But one truth remained: whether she ran, hid, or was taken, Clara Whitmore had vanished into the dark waters of the marina, and no one knew where her story led next. The marina footage left the town of Crescent Bay divided, but once the shocks faded, the days stretched into weeks, the weeks into months, and then years. Clara Whitmore's name slipped slowly from headlines, but for her family, the silence was louder than any siren. At first, the Whitmores fought back against the quiet. They held vigils on the beach every month, candles flickering against the crashing waves. They printed missing posters, plastering Clara's smile on telephone poles, gas stations, and grocery stores. "Someone knows something," her mother would say, her voice shaking through local news interviews. But as each year passed without answers, hope became harder to hold on to. Her father, Richard, withdrew into himself. He stopped attending vigils, stopped talking about the marina video altogether. Neighbors recalled seeing him sit on the porch late into the night, staring into the dark street as if expecting Clara to walk back home at any moment. "She's not gone," he would whisper to himself, though his eyes told a different story. Her mother, Elaine, refused to give up so easily. She turned to online communities, posting Clara's picture in missing persons forums, hoping some stranger across the country might recognize her. But the internet was a double-edged sword. For every kind soul who shared the post, there were others who mocked, accused, or claimed Clara had run away on purpose. One anonymous comment haunted Elaine for years. "She didn't want to be found. Stop looking."
The town, too, began to fracture. For some, Clara's disappearance was a wound that never healed. For others, it became an old scar, rarely mentioned. Crescent Bay was small. People wanted to move on, to talk about the present instead of a tragedy they couldn't fix. Theories, however, never faded. In diners, people whispered over coffee. Had Clara boarded a fishing vessel that night? Was she trafficked through the port? Or was she hiding in plain sight, perhaps in another town, living under a new name? One popular rumor claimed she had been spotted years later at a rest stop near Nevada, thin and disoriented. Another said she had joined a traveling group, abandoning Crescent Bay for freedom. None of these leads were ever confirmed, but each one reopened wounds. Each sighting gave her parents a burst of hope, followed by crushing disappointment when nothing came of it. And what about Tyler Moreno? For years, he carried the invisible weight of accusation. Even when the marina footage surfaced, suspicion never completely left him. "People still looked at me like I was guilty," he later admitted in an interview. Jobs were harder to keep, relationships harder to form. He left Crescent Bay for a time, moving inland, trying to escape the whispers. But no matter where he went, he was always the boy who might have killed Clara Whitmore. The cold silence of the case didn't just affect the family, it infected the community. Teachers at Clara's old school would pause when taking attendance, remembering the empty desk. Friends grew up, went to college, had families, but Clara's name was still etched into their teenage years, a reminder of innocence lost. 9 years is a long time to live with uncertainty. Some families of missing children find closure in believing their loved one is alive, hidden somewhere. Others come to accept loss even without proof. The Whitmores lived between those extremes, never able to rest. By 2015, Clara's case was rarely mentioned in the local paper. New tragedies, new headlines took its place. The world kept moving forward, but Crescent Bay carried a secret weight, its unanswered question of what happened on that night in 2010. And then came 2019. It was supposed to be an ordinary construction project. Workers were clearing out an old storage shed at the edge of town, preparing the land for redevelopment.
The shed had been abandoned for years, its roof sagging, the ground around it overgrown with weeds. To most, it was just another forgotten corner of Crescent Bay. But as the crew dug into the soil beneath the shed's foundation, one worker's shovel hit something hard. At first, they thought it was a rock. Then came the sickening realization: bones. Authorities were called immediately, and within days, DNA tests confirmed what the Whitmores had feared for nearly a decade. The remains belonged to Clara. She had never run away. She had never boarded a boat. She had never left Crescent Bay at all. The discovery shattered the fragile hope that her parents had clung to. Elaine collapsed when the results were delivered. Richard sat silently in the corner, hands over his face, whispering, "She was here all along." For the town, the news was both a shock and a grim relief. The mystery had an answer, but it wasn't the one anyone wanted. Crescent Bay gathered for a memorial service, finally able to mourn Clara openly. Yet, even in grief, questions remained. Who put her there? And why had they gone unnoticed for so long? The silence of 9 years had been broken, not by an eyewitness, not by a confession, but by chance. If not for a construction project, Clara might still have been hidden in the soil, her family condemned to endless wondering. The very ground the community walked over daily. The discovery of Clara's remains was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of its darkest chapter. For nearly a decade, Crescent Bay had carried Clara Whitmore's disappearance like a wound that refused to close. Theories filled the silence, but no answers came. Parents used her name as a warning. Teachers spoke of her in hushed tones, and her family continued to live in limbo. But on an otherwise ordinary autumn morning in 2019, all of that changed. It started with construction crews preparing to clear land on the far edge of town. The site was unremarkable, a sagging storage shed that hadn't been used in years, its boards warped by rain and its walls marked with graffiti. Workers were tasked with tearing it down so the property could be redeveloped into apartments. None of them imagined they were about to walk into the center of a decade-old nightmare. A worker named Miguel Lopez was digging through soil beneath the shed's foundation when his shovel struck something hard. At first, he thought it was concrete or debris, but when the metal edge scraped against the surface, he noticed the shape was irregular. Curiosity turned into dread as he unearthed what appeared to be fragments of bone. He froze, staring down at the pale shard in the dirt. It wasn't stone. It wasn't debris. Police were called immediately. The site was sealed off, yellow tape surrounding the area that, until that morning, had just been another forgotten corner of Crescent Bay. When the remains were carefully exhumed by forensic teams, the truth emerged piece by piece. A shallow grave had been dug beneath the shed, no deeper than 3 feet. Inside were human remains, wrapped in deteriorating fabric. The coroner's team worked for days to recover the bones, cataloging every fragment. By the end of the week, DNA confirmed the worst. The remains belonged to Clara Whitmore. News spread through Crescent Bay like wildfire. The girl who had fueled nearly a decade of speculation had not run away, had not disappeared into another city, had not boarded a boat at the marina. She had been here the entire time, buried in the ground, hidden beneath the shed people passed every day. The revelation broke something in the town. People who had clung to theories of escape or abduction felt the weight of guilt. They had spoken of Clara as if she had chosen to leave, as
For her family, the news was devastating. Elaine collapsed when police arrived at her doorstep with the DNA results. Richard, her father, sat silently for hours, barely able to process the words. "She was here," he finally whispered, his voice trembling. "She was here the whole time." The cruel irony crushed him. While he had searched highways, chased false sightings, and begged strangers for leads, Clara had been buried less than a mile from their home. The discovery also reignited suspicions. Who had buried her there, and why had investigators never thought to search the shed in 2010? Detectives pored over old records, retracing the initial investigation. The shed had been overlooked. At the time, it was considered private property, not directly connected to Clara's disappearance. No warrant had been issued, no search dogs brought there. It was a failure that now loomed like a shadow over the department. Forensics began their slow, meticulous work. Soil samples were tested, clothing fragments examined, and trace evidence combed from the remains. What they found shifted the case into its next shocking phase. Fibers discovered on Clara's clothing did not match anything from her home, her spool, or Tyler Moreno's house. Instead, they matched materials commonly found in the old shed itself, ropes used for carpentry and insulation that dated back years. Even more telling were chemical residues on the fabric. They were consistent with solvents and paints kept in the shed, suggesting Clara had been there at some point before her death.
The very ground the community walked over daily? The discovery of Clara's remains was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of its darkest chapter. For nearly a decade, Crescent Bay had carried Clara Whitmore's disappearance like a wound that refused to close. Theories filled the silence, but no answers came. Parents used her name as a warning. Teachers spoke of her in hushed tones, and her family continued to live in limbo. But on an otherwise ordinary autumn morning in 2019, all of that changed. It started with construction crews preparing to clear land on the far edge of town. The site was unremarkable. A sagging storage shed that hadn't been used in years, its boards warped by rain and its walls marked with graffiti. Workers were tasked with tearing it down so the property could be redeveloped into apartments. None of them imagined they were about to walk into the center of a decade-old nightmare. A worker named Miguel Lopez was digging through soil beneath the shed's foundation when his shovel struck something hard. At first, he thought it was concrete or debris, but when the metal edge scraped against the surface, he noticed the shape was irregular. Curiosity turned into dread as he unearthed what appeared to be fragments of bone. He froze, staring down at the pale shard in the dirt. It wasn't stone. It wasn't debris.
This revelation tore through Crescent Bay like another storm. If Clara had been in the shed, it meant the person responsible for her death had not lured her to some distant location or trafficked her through the marina. No, she had died right here, on familiar ground. Detectives reopened every angle of the case. Tyler Moreno was once again questioned. He was older now, in his mid-20s, weary from years of suspicion. But when confronted with the forensic evidence, nothing tied him to the shed. He had no access to it, no connection to its contents. Attention then turned to the property itself. Who had owned the shed in 2010? Who had keys? Who had access? Records showed that the shed was part of a parcel belonging to an old workshop. The workshop had long since closed, but over the years it had been maintained by a trusted local handyman, Daniel Whitmore, Clara's uncle. The possibility sent shivers through the investigative team. Daniel had been present at vigils. He had volunteered in search parties. He had comforted Elaine and Richard during their darkest moments. All the while,
No one ever suspected him. But the forensic trail told a different story. Fibers from Daniel's work clothes matched those found with Clara's remains. Paint residues recovered from his workshop were consistent with the traces found on her clothing. Slowly, a chilling possibility emerged. Clara had not sought out a stranger at the marina, nor had she run away. She had crossed paths with someone she trusted, her own uncle. Investigators built their case carefully, aware of how explosive the accusation would be. Neighbors described Daniel as quiet but dependable, a man who fixed fences, painted houses, and rarely raised his voice. But others recalled odd details. One neighbor said he worked late into the night more often than most. Another remembered seeing him near the marina shortly after Clara vanished, though at the time no one thought much of it. What haunted many was the memory of Daniel at search parties. He carried flashlights, handed out flyers, and offered condolences. If the forensic evidence proved true, then the same man who joined the hunt for Clara had already known she would never be found alive. The town reeled at the possibility. How could someone so close, someone considered family, have kept such a secret for nearly a decade? The investigation into Daniel Whitmore was just beginning, but already Crescent Bay was bracing for another revelation, one that would shatter the fragile trust holding the community together. And now I'll turn this back to you, the viewer. If the evidence pointed towards your own family member, could you accept it? Or would you convince yourself there had to be another explanation? The discovery of Clara's remains did more than reopen a case. It forced a small town to confront the terrifying truth that sometimes the greatest danger is not outside the walls of home. It's within them. The news broke on a gray morning in March 2020. A helicopter hovered over the quiet suburb, its blades chopping the air as police cars lined the sleepy cul-de-sac. Neighbors peeked through curtains as uniformed officers moved with purpose. And then the image that would forever stay burned into their minds. Daniel Whitmore, once the affable neighbor and father of two, being led out in handcuffs. His face was pale, his head down, lips pressed tight as reporters shouted questions. Some gasped. Others whispered, "No, not Daniel." For nearly a decade, Daniel had been the man who offered to mow neighbors' lawns, who coached Little League, who waved kindly as he drove his truck past the marina where Clara Reynolds was last seen. The idea that he could be the monster behind her disappearance felt unthinkable. But police weren't moving on a hunch. They had waited 10 years, gathering fragments of evidence, until finally, technology and persistence had caught up with a ghost from 2010. And so the headline read, "California 2010 Cold Case Solved. Arrest Revealed a Chilling Truth." But was the truth really as simple as the arrest suggested? Or was this just the beginning of a darker revelation? Inside the dimly lit chamber of the county police station, Daniel sat shackled to a steel chair. His lawyer had not yet arrived. Across from him, Detective Ramirez leaned forward, a man who had chased this case for nearly a decade.
"Daniel," Ramirez began calmly, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were photographs of Clara Reynolds, school portraits, the marina security footage, and finally, the recent discovery of her remains near a dried-up creek bed. Daniel barely glanced at them. His jaw tightened. "I didn't kill her," he said flatly. The detective didn't flinch. "We've heard that before, but now we have evidence. DNA, Daniel, from your truck, from her fingernails." Daniel's eyes flickered, the first crack in his composure. Still, he shook his head. "Coincidence. She was in my truck once. Everyone knew that. I gave her a ride home one time. That doesn't mean I killed her." "What do you think? Could a single ride explain the traces of DNA found years later? Or was Daniel desperately weaving a story to cover something he could no longer outrun?"
The truth is, Clara's case had been ice cold until 2019, but forensic science had advanced. Tiny fragments once dismissed as inconclusive were reanalyzed. A touch of skin cells beneath Clara's fingernails, preserved in evidence bags for a decade, now pointed directly to Daniel Whitmore. Even more damning was the discovery in his garage, an old tarp folded and hidden beneath boxes. On it were microscopic blood traces matching Clara's DNA. The tarp had been overlooked in the original 2010 search, considered just another piece of camping gear. Detective Ramirez leaned forward in the interrogation room. "Help me understand this, Daniel. If you're innocent, why is Clara's blood on your tarp?" Daniel swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. "I don't know. I don't know how it got there." But was that possible? Could blood appear without a violent encounter? Or had Daniel kept a silent trophy of a night he never wanted to remember? News of the arrest tore the town apart. Some neighbors stood firmly behind Daniel. "He's no killer," one insisted to reporters. "This is a mistake. He's a family man. He'd never hurt anyone." But others whispered darker stories. That Daniel had a temper, that his marriage was rocky, that late at night he was seen lurking near the marina even after Clara vanished. Clara's family, meanwhile, clung to the evidence. Her mother, Clara Reynolds, stood outside the courthouse trembling but resolute. "For 10 years, I've prayed for justice. If Daniel Whitmore is responsible for my daughter's death, then he deserves to face the truth and the punishment." Her brother Matthew was less restrained. "He murdered my sister, and now he'll finally pay." Yet even as the case seemed airtight, questions gnawed at the edges of the narrative. As the investigation deepened, prosecutors revealed a chilling theory. Clara had uncovered something Daniel wanted buried. Financial irregularities, suspicious transactions tied to a property deal Daniel was involved in. Could it be that Clara, smart and curious, had stumbled on a secret too dangerous to ignore? The prosecution painted a picture of a desperate man silencing a girl who knew too much. But then Daniel's defense team countered with a stunning claim. Daniel wasn't alone that night. They suggested another figure might have lured Clara to the marina, someone who had yet to be named, someone hiding in plain sight. What if Daniel wasn't the mastermind, but merely a participant, or even a scapegoat? And so the audience is left with a chilling question. Is this case truly solved, or is there a darker player still out there, hidden in the shadows? In court documents, prosecutors revealed haunting details. Clara had fought back. The skin cells under her nails proved she had scratched her attacker, likely in the final moments of her life. For Clara's family, this detail was agonizing. Their daughter had not gone quietly. She had resisted. She was strong, even in terror. Her mother clutched her picture in court, whispering through tears. "She tried. My baby tried." It was this human detail, not the DNA, not the tarp, not the interrogations that cut deepest. A reminder that beneath the headlines, a young life had been brutally stolen. As Daniel's trial loomed, the town braced for the truth. Some believed justice was finally within reach. Others whispered of cover-ups, conspiracies, and accomplices still free. And yet, the deeper detectives dug, the more unsettling the story became. Evidence hinted at another set of footprints at the creek bed. A second DNA profile, faint but present, that did not belong to Clara or Daniel. So we ask you,
Was Daniel Whitmore the true monster of this story? Or had Clara stumbled into something larger, darker, and more dangerous than anyone imagined? The chilling truth was only beginning to surface.
It was suffocatingly silent the morning the verdict was expected. Reporters filled every seat, cameras lined the steps outside, and Crescent Bay, once a sleepy coastal town, had become the center of a storm that refused to die down. At the defense table, Daniel Whitmore sat motionless. His once neat hair was now streaked with gray, his face gaunt from sleepless nights. Across the aisle, Clara Reynolds' family gripped each other's hands tightly. A mother, a father, and a brother, all waiting for the answer to the question that had haunted them for nearly 10 years. Who killed Clara? But before the jury even returned, something unexpected happened. During a break in the trial, Daniel requested to speak. Against his lawyer's advice, he stood before the judge, his voice trembling as he addressed the court. "I never wanted this to happen," he began, his words heavy, each one dragging the room deeper into silence. "Clara wasn't supposed to die." Gasps echoed. Her mother buried her face in her hands. Daniel continued. "She came to me the night of the party. She was upset, crying after fighting with her boyfriend. She wanted to talk. I thought I could calm her down, but then she saw something she shouldn't have. Documents in my shed. Proof of deals I was making. Deals that weren't legal." His voice cracked. "She threatened to tell. I panicked. I grabbed her, we struggled, and she hit her head. It wasn't planned. It wasn't murder. But when I realized what I'd done, I couldn't face it. So I buried her. And I lived with that every single day." The courtroom froze. A decade of rumors, suspicions, and theories seemed to crystallize in that one moment. But the story didn't end there. If Daniel expected this confession to close the case, he was mistaken, because prosecutors immediately countered with evidence that complicated his story. Investigators had uncovered financial links between Daniel and a larger criminal network, property fraud, money laundering, and even hints of trafficking. Suddenly, Clara's death no longer looked like a tragic accident. It looked like the silencing of a potential whistleblower. And here's the shocking part. Evidence at the creek bed where Clara's remains were found revealed a second DNA profile. It didn't match Daniel. It didn't match Clara. To this day, that DNA remains unidentified. So the haunting question lingers. Was Daniel truly alone that night? Or was Clara's death part of something bigger? Something Daniel was too afraid to admit? And this is where I want to bring you in. What do you think? Was Daniel telling the truth about the accident, a panicked reaction that turned deadly? Or was he minimizing his role in a much bigger crime, a crime that may have involved others who still walk free today? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every theory, and trust me, this case needs voices like yours to keep the pressure on. Daniel Whitmore was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. For Clara's family, it was a bittersweet moment. Justice in some form had been delivered, but no sentence could bring Clara back. Her mother said quietly outside the courthouse, "At least now she can rest. But I will never stop wondering if there's more to the story, because mothers know. And I know we don't have all the answers yet." Her brother Matthew added, "I'll never forgive him. He lived free while my sister lay in the ground, and I won't stop until we know who else was involved." Clara's story is more than a tragedy. It's a reminder of how fragile trust can be. The people we let into our lives, neighbors, family, mentors, sometimes wear masks we can't see through. It also shows the importance of perseverance. This case could have stayed cold forever. If not for the construction crew's discovery, if not for forensic advances, Clara's voice might never have been heard. And for you watching this, I want you to think about something.
Clara's instincts mattered. She sensed something was wrong with her uncle's dealings. She spoke up. And even though it cost her everything, she refused to stay silent. How many times do we ignore our instincts because we don't want to rock the boat? How many times do we dismiss warning signs because it's easier to trust than to question? That's the life lesson hidden in this tragedy. Your gut is often your greatest protector. Trust it. Daniel's confession gave Crescent Bay some peace, but it also left a shadow that may never fully lift. Because one fact remains undeniable. Another DNA profile was found with Clara's remains. Someone else was there. Someone else has never been named. So I'll ask you again, do you believe justice was truly served? Or did the real story die with Clara? If you believe Clara's story and others like hers deserve to be remembered, subscribe to Dark Patterns. Here we don't just talk about missing persons, we uncover the lessons their stories leave behind. Because every missing person is more than a headline. They're a life, a family, a legacy, and a warning we cannot ignore. And remember, stories like Clara's are not rare. Cases go cold every day. Some will never see justice unless people like you keep asking questions. So let's ask them. Together.